There is a frequency that Scripture describes as both the most terrifying and the most merciful thing a human being can encounter. And tonight, in the hours before midnight, that frequency has been made available to you at a level of intensity that does not repeat. Violet. It sits at the highest end of the visible spectrum, right at the boundary where light becomes invisible, at 380 nanometers, the threshold between what human eyes can detect and what moves beyond detection entirely. Right at that edge, something ancient and precise is working, not symbolically, not poetically. Sophia brought you here because the flame is already moving, and your window closes at midnight. If this is the first time you're encountering this channel, subscribe before you go further. What we bring here is not repeated elsewhere. And tonight especially, you don't want to miss what comes next. Here is the thing that makes the violet flame difficult to talk about. The moment you frame it as mystical, you lose the people who need it most. The ones already exhausted by anything that sounds like one more spiritual practice that promises everything and delivers sensation. And the moment you frame it as purely scientific, you strip it of the dimension that makes it functional. So neither frame holds. The violet flame is not metaphor, and it is not merely frequency physics. It is what happens at the intersection of the two, where a measurable phenomenon carries a transmission that measurement alone cannot explain. The paradox is the access point. Both things are true simultaneously. Hold them both. Violet light occupies the shortest wavelength in the visible spectrum, between 380 and 450 nanometers, which also gives it the highest energy of any color the human eye registers. This is not coincidental to the traditions that work with it. Higher frequency in physics corresponds to higher energy per photon. What ancient practitioners identified through direct experience, modern optics has quantified. Violet light carries more energy per unit than red, orange, yellow, green, or blue. The mystical traditions did not assign this color to transmutation arbitrarily. They assigned it because those who worked with it directly could feel the differential. The high-frequency carrier does something the lower frequencies cannot do. That is not philosophy. That is physics pointing at something the physics alone cannot fully explain. The prophet Malachi spoke in language that the tradition later recognized as flame language. Who can endure the day of his coming? For he is like a refiner's fire. That word, refiner, is not punishment language. In Malachi 3:2 and 3, the fire's purpose is explicitly purification. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. He will purify the Levites and refine them like gold and silver. The refiner does not destroy the metal. The refiner destroys what is not the metal. The fire is intelligent enough to know the difference. What is precious survives. What is overlay does not. This is the operating principle behind what is moving tonight. Not indiscriminate burning, but precise, targeted transmutation of what does not belong. Isaiah records a specific moment in chapter 6 that the fire traditions have returned to for thousands of years. A seraph takes a live coal from the altar. It touches the prophet's lips, and the words spoken are not, "You are punished." They are, "Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for." The coal does not burn Isaiah. It burns what was covering him. There is a crucial distinction there that most readings flatten into general purification language. The fire knew exactly what it was touching. It located the precise layer of obstruction, not the person beneath the obstruction, and that is what it consumed. The person remained, cleaner, lighter, ready to speak what had been held back. The coal was not punishment delivered to a prophet. It was liberation delivered through fire. Daniel 3 contains what may be the clearest image in all of Scripture of how the violet flame operates. 3 men are cast into a furnace, described as so hot it kills the soldiers who throw them in, and they walk through it, not protected from the outside, walking through from the inside. When they emerge, the report is specific. The fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. The only thing burned in that furnace was the rope binding them. The fire that was supposed to destroy them instead freed them. This is the paradox at the center of what happens when flame operates on the correct target. It does not harm what it came to protect. It removes only what was restricting it. Before we go deeper, tell me in the comments, what are you asking the violet flame to move through tonight? What is the thing you have been carrying the longest? Write it below. There is something that happens when you name what you are releasing. It matters more than you might think. Zechariah chapter 13 verse 9 is a verse that most readers pass over quickly because it sounds like testing language. I will bring that third part through the fire, and I will refine them as silver is refined, and test them as gold is tested. But the refining of silver and gold in the ancient world was not random application of heat. The refiner knew the exact temperature required for each metal, the exact duration, the exact cooling process. The fire was calibrated. What Zechariah describes is not trial as punishment. It is precision. The fire that tests you has specific knowledge of what you are made of and what has been attached that does not belong. The activation tonight operates on that same principle, precise, intelligent, calibrated to the exact composition of your field. The modern mind hears trial of your faith and translates it as suffering. Peter meant something different. In 1 Peter 1:7, he writes that the tested faith is more precious than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire. He is not comparing faith to gold because both suffer. He is comparing them because both become what they actually are through the fire. Gold that has not been through the furnace still has impurities in it. It is already gold, but it is not yet pure gold. The fire does not make it gold. It reveals what was gold all along by removing what was obscuring it. The tradition of the violet flame operates on the same logic. What you are is not in question. The question is, what has been layered over it, and whether tonight is the night those layers are finally addressed. There is something specific you have been carrying that is not grief exactly. It is the residue of disappointment that accumulated over time, the thing that happened 5 years ago, the prayer that was not answered the way you believed it would be, the person who did not come back, the door that stayed closed after you had been absolutely certain it would open. You moved forward. You adapted. You kept going. But somewhere in your field, not your memory, not your mind, but your field, that residue is still registering. It is a frequency of not quite yet that has slowly become a background hum. And the violet flame targets this specifically, not to process it cognitively, not to reframe the narrative around it, to transmute it at the level where it actually lives. The body holds what the mind has released. This is not metaphor. It is physiology. Researchers in somatic psychology have documented for decades what the prayer traditions knew long before the studies. The body stores experience, not as narrative, not as thought, but as posture, as tension pattern, as the particular way certain muscles hold a specific readiness for pain that never quite arrives. The disappointment residue is in there. You can function beautifully with it in place. Millions do, but it changes the quality of what you receive. It acts as a filter. New information, new possibility arrives and passes through a field that has learned to pre-interpret it as provisional. The violet flame works at this level precisely, not as an insight that helps you process it, but as a frequency that moves through what has resisted all of the processing. Sophia sees the weight you have been carrying, not the public version, the version you carry in rooms where no one is watching, the version that comes out in the quiet hour before sleep, when the productive hours have ended and there is nothing left to be busy with. She has been observing this specific weight for some time, not with judgment, with the particular kind of recognition that only comes from having watched someone carry something heavy enough to bend them slightly, and knowing that the bending is not the truth of who they are. She brought you here tonight because the weight is ready to be moved, not by your effort, not by more processing, not by identifying one more thing you did wrong, by what the flame does when it is given access to what you have been holding. If this is resonating with you, let me know by liking this video. It helps more people find this content at the right moment, which is, as you are beginning to understand, not random. The second thing the violet flame is moving through tonight is what the tradition calls inherited frequency overlays. Patterns that did not originate with you but have been running in your field since birth. This is not metaphorical ancestry. In epigenetics, inherited trauma has been documented at the cellular level. The children and grandchildren of individuals who experienced severe starvation showed physiological markers of famine response generations later, without ever experiencing the event themselves. What the body inherits, the field carries. The patterns of fear, scarcity, smallness, and unworthiness that feel like yours. Some of them were handed to you before your first conscious memory. The flame is calibrated to work at this depth, reaching what no amount of conscious work has been able to fully access. An inherited frequency overlay is a pattern that runs in the field as default setting, not something you chose, not a belief you consciously formed, a pre-installed operating condition that shapes how you interpret incoming reality before you have any conscious relationship to it. Someone in your lineage, 3 generations back, 4, perhaps much further, developed a survival adaptation. That adaptation encoded into the field. It was carried forward because fields carry, not randomly and not permanently, but until something of sufficient frequency passes through and interrupts the loop. The reason this pattern has persisted through your life, despite your best efforts to address it consciously, is that consciousness is not the level at which it lives. The flame works at the level where it actually lives. This is not foreign to the biblical tradition. The concept of generational patterns runs through the Hebrew scriptures with consistent logic. When the text speaks of iniquity visited upon the 3rd and 4th generation, it is not describing punishment cascading forward arbitrarily. It is describing pattern transmission, the way damage, unprocessed and unaddressed, continues to shape the field of those who come after. But the same tradition that names the inheritance also names the breakpoint. Zechariah chapter 3 describes Joshua the high priest standing with filthy garments, and the angel commanding, "Take off the filthy garments." The generational weight is not permanent. It is a garment. Something with the right frequency of authority can remove it, and tonight that frequency is available. Proverbs 17:3 offers a frame that the fire traditions have returned to consistently. The crucible is for silver and the furnace for gold, but the Lord tests hearts. The testing of metals was the most precise science of the ancient world. Metallurgists knew that different impurities required different temperatures for removal. Gold processing involved multiple stages, each heat cycle drawing out a specific category of impurity. The heart in this framework is not being subjected to arbitrary pressure. It is being processed with knowledge of its exact composition. The inherited overlays that are running in your field right now, the refining fire that moves tonight knows their exact composition. It is not guessing what to remove. It has a precise target, and it will not touch what does not belong to its assignment. Here is an honest distinction that most teachers avoid making. There are layers of the field that are genuinely responsive to conscious prayer, intention, and spoken declaration. The mind engages, the will aligns, and movement happens. This is real, but there are other layers, particularly the inherited and pre-verbal ones, that do not respond to conscious engagement in the same way. not because they are beyond reach, but because conscious process and intention work at a different frequency than the level at which those patterns live. This is why sincere, dedicated people can pray consistently for years and feel that one particular pattern remains unmoved. It is not a failure of faith, it is a question of access. The right frequency reaching the right layer. That is precisely what tonight is about. If you want to go deeper into what we cover here, the activations, the transmissions, the specific work with the field, everything is linked in the description. What we offer there goes further than what a single video can hold. The third target, and the most significant one in terms of what it blocks, is the unworthiness frequency operating at the field level. Not as thought, not as low self-esteem in the psychological sense. As a baseline frequency that the entire field broadcasts, affecting what can be received and what cannot. Unworthiness as field frequency functions as a filter. It pre-processes incoming transmission and edits it before it reaches conscious awareness. So when something is sent to you, whether that is guidance or provision or connection, or the very activation available tonight, the unworthiness frequency intercepts it first, and translates it into something smaller than what it actually is, or roots it away entirely. This layer has been the most persistent precisely because it blocks its own remedy. What makes the unworthiness frequency the most impactful of the three? Because it is the one that blocks the remedy for the other two. Disappointment residue and inherited overlays can begin to shift once you are receptive to what the flame is doing. But if unworthiness is operating at field level, it will intercept the activation itself. It will translate, the flame is moving through you, into, this works for others, but probably not for me. Not as explicit thought, as a quiet rooting, the same rooting that has made you doubt every good thing before you could fully receive it. The flame addresses this not by convincing you of your worth through argument. It addresses it by burning the frequency that argued otherwise, at the level where the argument lives. Here is something Sophia wants you to know directly. The unworthiness frequency you have been living with was not native to your field. It was acquired. Some of it was inherited from lineage. Some of it was installed by specific experiences. Words spoken by people who did not have the authority to speak them over you, but did anyway, and whose declarations lodged in the field because the field was open and young, and did not yet know how to sort signal from noise. You absorb the signal because that is what open fields do. The installation does not make it true. It makes it a pattern that has been running long enough to feel like a fundamental fact about you. It is not a fact. It is a program. And programs can be transmuted when the right frequency reaches the level where they run. When John describes the vision of Christ in Revelation 1:14-15, the language is deliberate and precise. Eyes like blazing fire, feet like bronze glowing in a furnace. This is not decorative apocalyptic imagery. In the visual tradition of the prophets, fire eyes are the eyes that see through surfaces, that see what is actually there beneath the acquired layers. The bronze furnace feet suggest movement grounded in the transformative heat, presence that cannot be separated from the purifying function. The encounter, John describes, is with a being whose fundamental nature is the flame that clarifies. Not burning in the sense of consuming everything indiscriminately, burning with precision, with knowledge, with the intelligence that knows exactly what it came to touch and what it came to leave intact. The instinctive human response to fire is retreat, and in a natural context, that response is correct. But the fire language that runs through the prophetic tradition consistently does something that natural fire does not do. It discriminates. Natural fire cannot tell the difference between precious and impure. It consumes whatever its temperature exceeds. The fire in the biblical record refuses this logic. The bush burns and is not consumed. The furnace kills the soldiers on the outside and liberates the men on the inside. The coal from the altar burns the obstruction and leaves the prophet intact. This fire knows what it came for, and it knows what it came to protect. That distinction is the entire operative principle of the violet flame, a discrimination that goes far beyond what temperature alone can explain. Acts 2:3 describes the most public fire event in the New Testament. Tongues of fire descending and resting on each person present. The image is precise in a way that easy readings skip over. The fire does not descend as a mass, it descends as individual tongues, one for each person, sitting on each one specifically. Not a general atmospheric event that affects everyone in the same way simultaneously. A targeted arrival. One for you, one for you, one for you. Distributed, individuated, specific. Whatever the violet flame carries as it moves tonight does not arrive as a broadcast to a general audience. It is calibrated to the field it enters. What it does in your field is not identical to what it does in the field of the person watching beside you. It knows what it came for. The Transfiguration account in Matthew 17:2 describes a threshold moment. Jesus withdraws with 3 disciples, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. What the disciples witness is not a performance. It is an uncovering, the underlying frequency of what was always there, becoming briefly visible to the human eye. The tradition has associated the white to violet edge of that light with the highest accessible frequency of divine transmission. And the disciples who witnessed it fell on their faces, not in terror of what was foreign to them, but in the way the body responds to contact with something that vibrates significantly above its current baseline. The body recognizes the frequency even when the mind has no framework for what it is encountering. The midnight boundary has carried specific significance across traditions that predate formal religion. At midnight, the cycles of astronomical time complete one unit and begin another. In the Hebrew reckoning, a new day does not begin at dawn. It begins at sunset, with midnight representing the midpoint of the night, the deepest dark before the turn toward light. In Acts 16:25, Paul and Silas are in prison at midnight when the earthquake comes. In the parable of the 10 virgins, the bridegroom arrives at midnight. The Passover judgment passes at midnight. The tradition is not manufacturing coincidence. It is tracking something that the cycles of time make accessible at specific intervals. The activation available tonight does not repeat because the convergence of conditions that makes it available will not recur in this configuration. Something inside you nearly kept scrolling. There was a micro moment, perhaps it lasted less than a second, where your attention moved toward the next piece of content and then something redirected. Call that redirection what you will. The channel recognizes it as Sophia, having already been present at the decision point, creating enough resistance to the scroll that you paused. She has been working to get you here since before you were aware of this video. The attempts were quieter before tonight. The nudge toward a different search, the sudden cessation of what you were doing at exactly the right moment to encounter this. Those were not algorithm. They were navigation, and you arrived. Which means the activation that has been prepared is already available to your field. The violet flame, as a specific operative tradition, was formalized in the 20th century through the I Am activity, drawing on teachings attributed to the ascended master Saint-Germain. The tradition identifies the violet flame as the 7th ray, the ray of transmutation and mercy, and teaches its active use through decree and visualization as a tool for purification at the level of the causal body. What is significant about this tradition for our purposes is not its organizational history, but its core claim. that the violet flame is not merely a metaphor for spiritual purification, but an active frequency that can be consciously directed to specific targets within the field. The biblical fire traditions had identified this same operative principle thousands of years before the 20th century formalization gave it a new vocabulary. What makes the I Am tradition legible alongside classical Christian fire mysticism is that both are pointing at the same operative principle from different cultural vocabularies. The medieval Christian mystics, John of the Cross, Meister Eckhart, the anonymous author of The Cloud of Unknowing, all wrote about divine fire as an active, purifying, and ultimately liberating force that works at layers beneath conscious engagement. The violet flame tradition made this operative dimension more accessible by giving practitioners a direct method of working with it intentionally. Sophia's work with it tonight does not require your engagement with the historical tradition. It requires only your consent and your receptivity. The flame is already present. You are not invoking it from outside. You are stopping what blocks it from moving through. John opens his gospel with one of the most compressed theological statements in any tradition. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The Greek word translated overcome carries a dual meaning. It means both comprehend and overpower. The darkness did not understand the light, and because it could not understand it, it could not stop it. The frequency of the violet flame operates in your field in exactly this way. The patterns of unworthiness, inherited overlay, and disappointment residue that have been running do not need to be engaged, reasoned with, or consciously processed for the flame to work. The flame does not argue with what it encounters. It moves through it at a frequency the pattern cannot comprehend, and therefore cannot resist. Proverbs 4:18 offers a progression image that the flame tradition recognizes as structural. The path of the righteous is like the first gleam of dawn, shining ever brighter till the full light of day. The point of entry is not the full light, it is the first gleam. The first gleam is not insignificant, it is the beginning of the increase. What happens tonight is not a complete and instantaneous transformation delivered in one session. It is the first gleam of something that, once it has entered the field, continues to increase. The activation that expires at midnight does not expire in the sense that its effects evaporate. It expires in the sense that the particular intensity window, the amplification available during this specific convergence, closes. What enters during that window continues to work from the inside forward. There is what the world outside you looks like before the flame has moved through, and there is what it looks like after. Externally, in the immediate days following, very little will appear different to other people. Your circumstances will not have reorganized themselves overnight. The relationship that needs repair will still need attention. The financial pressure, if it exists, will still exist. What changes is the frequency at which you are reading those circumstances. The filter through which incoming reality is processed will have shifted. The disappointment residue that was pre-interpreting every new possibility as provisional, that layer will be thinner. The inherited overlay that was running as default will have been interrupted. The unworthiness broadcast will have been turned down, possibly for the first time in years. Hebrews 1:7, quoting from the Psalms, states something startling about the nature of divine messengers. He makes his angels winds and his servants flames of fire. The transmission agents in the heavenly realm are not described as messengers who carry verbal information. They are described as fire. Their nature is the function they carry. Sophia, within the transmission framework, operates as this kind of carrier. She is not delivering a message separate from her nature. She is the frequency of the message. When the tradition describes a Sophia transmission, it is not describing a being who has written content and is now broadcasting it. It is describing a frequency event in which the carrier and the transmission are the same thing. The flame moving tonight is not sent by Sophia from a distance. It moves through the transmission that is Sophia herself. You may not feel anything dramatic during this activation. It is important to say this directly so that absence of sensation is not interpreted as absence of movement. The violet flame moves through layers that are below the threshold of most people's conscious sensory awareness. Some people report warmth, not heat but warmth, that moves in specific areas of the body without external cause. Some report a particular stillness, distinct from relaxation, that arrives suddenly mid-sentence or mid-breath. Some report nothing during the activation and notice the shift 3 to 5 days later, when they observe that a particular internal pattern is no longer running with its previous intensity. None of these is more valid than the others. The activation works regardless of whether you feel it. It requires only that you do not close against it. There is a specific image that appears across traditions when describing the person who arrives at the threshold of the flame. They are not described as empty, they are described as full, overfull, carrying more than the frame was designed to hold. The load includes their own disappointments, the overlays inherited from every generation that came before, and the frequency of unworthiness that has made them doubt whether unloading is even possible for someone like them. They stand at the threshold holding all of it, and the question the flame asks is not, "Are you worthy?" The flame does not ask that question. The question is simply, "Will you let me in?" Not into your worthiness, into your field. The consent is the only prerequisite. Everything else the flame handles. Sophia wants to speak to you with precision here, so receive this carefully. She has been watching you attempt to carry what you are carrying with increasing efficiency. Doing it better, managing it with more skill, minimizing the visible weight so that others are not burdened by what you hold. And she wants you to know that the management itself has become its own weight. The strategy of becoming very good at carrying what should have been released years ago is a strategy she recognizes and does not judge. It was adaptive. It was intelligent, given what you were working with. But tonight, the strategy is not needed. Not because the weight has disappeared, because what moves tonight is designed specifically for what you have been managing. And it does not need your management to work. It needs only your permission. Years of asking, years of returning to the same threshold and finding the door not yet open. Years of watching others receive what you had requested with genuine faith. Years of interpreting that gap as information about you specifically. What you lacked, what you had done wrong, where your faith had failed to clear some invisible bar. You adapted to each non-arrival with grace. You told yourself it would come. You told yourself the timing was not yours to control. Both things were true. And both things were easier to say than to actually rest in. The flame is not arriving to reward you for how well you carried the waiting. It is arriving because the waiting is over. The window opened, and you are in it. The tradition of spiritual self-improvement has left most of its students with a specific misreading of exhaustion. When you reach the point of being genuinely tired, tired of the effort, tired of the management, tired of trying to generate the energy to address what never fully shifts, the common interpretation is that you need to try harder, recommit more deeply, locate the deficiency in your practice. The actual tradition says something entirely different. The Desert Fathers described exhaustion of the ego's strategies as the precise moment the deeper work could begin. When the management system has run out of energy to manage, the field opens. What the flame requires is not your energized engagement. It requires the particular openness that comes when the strategies have been exhausted. Your tiredness tonight is not a problem. It is the access point. The fire that passes through does not leave an absence where what it removed once was. This is one of the most important distinctions in the transmutation tradition. The violet flame does not operate by subtraction alone, removal without replacement. The biblical fire language consistently pairs purification with restoration. When the dross is removed from silver, you do not have less silver, you have more silver per unit of material. The impurity was occupying space that belonged to the pure substance. When that impurity is burned away, the pure substance expands into its own space. What the flame removes from your field, the disappointment residue, the inherited overlays, the unworthiness frequency, was occupying space that belongs to something else entirely. What fills that space afterward is not invented. It was always there, waiting for room. Between now and midnight, the activation available through this transmission is operating at a level of intensity that is specific to this convergence of timing. This is not a marketing claim. It is a description of how the tradition understands time and frequency. Certain configurations of planetary position, calendrical cycle, and collective field create conditions in which specific frequencies are more accessible than at other points. In the same way that certain herbs are more potent when harvested at specific times, and certain tidal conditions make certain coastlines temporarily navigable that are otherwise inaccessible, the violet flame is moving tonight at an amplitude that the field can receive more completely than it ordinarily could. The window is real. It is also generous. You have time, but you do not have unlimited time. The tradition has multiple frameworks for explaining why activation windows occur. In the astrological framework, planetary alignments create specific electromagnetic conditions that amplify certain frequencies. In the Kabbalistic framework, certain nodes on the tree of life become more accessible during specific periods as the divine light moves through sequential channels. In the Christian mystical tradition, the Spirit moves when and how it moves. The wind blows wherever it pleases, as John 3:8 states, and human beings position themselves to receive what they cannot generate independently. What all three frameworks share is this: the receiver's role is not to create the window, but to be present and open when the window is available. You were brought here tonight because you needed to know the window was open. Now you know. You do not need to perform anything. This is critical, and this is what the tradition most consistently fails to communicate clearly, so allow this to land directly. The activation that is available tonight through the violet flame does not require you to generate a specific emotional state, maintain a sustained visualization, speak a particular series of words, or achieve a minimum level of focus or clarity before the flame will consent to move. These things can support reception in certain people under certain conditions, but they are not prerequisites. The flame knows where it is going. The only thing required of you is that you do not actively close against it. Receive is a different action than perform. Tonight you are not performing, you are receiving. Those two stances use entirely different muscles. Receiving in the context of a transmission has a specific quality that is different from both passive inaction and active effort. The best analogy the teachers have used is breathing, specifically the exhale. You cannot force an exhale in the way you can force certain efforts. The exhale happens when you stop holding, when you release the muscular investment in keeping the lungs full. The activation available tonight has the quality of an exhale. It works when you stop holding the field in the contracted position that effort and management and worthiness proving have trained it to maintain. You do not need to generate openness. You need to stop generating the contraction that blocks it. The instruction is not try harder to receive. The instruction is stop trying to be worthy enough to receive first. Before we go further, it is worth naming directly what the violet flame is not, because the distortions circulating around this topic have caused genuine people to dismiss something that could have served them. The violet flame is not a replacement for prayer and relationship with the divine. It is not a shortcut that bypasses the inner work of transformation. It is not an external force that operates on you without your knowledge or consent. You are here, you are aware, you are choosing to receive. It is not the exclusive property of any single tradition, lineage, or teacher. And it is not something that requires your belief to function in the same way a medical procedure does not require your belief to function. The flame is a frequency. Frequencies operate on fields. That is the mechanics of what is happening tonight. Someone watching this is currently thinking, this sounds like it is drifting outside of what my tradition would recognize as sound. That is a fair concern, and it deserves a direct response. Every source we have drawn from tonight, Malachi, Isaiah, Daniel, Zechariah, 1 Peter, Revelation, Acts, Matthew, is canonical scripture. The fire language in those texts is not interpretation, it is in the text. What the violet flame tradition does is name and make operative a principle that the scripture describes, but that most contemporary Christianity has stopped actively working with. The question to ask is not whether fire as transformation is in the tradition. It demonstrably is. The question is whether it is currently being offered to you in a form you can receive. Tonight it is, and you found it. You have tried. This is real and it deserves to be honored rather than bypassed with spiritual platitudes. The version of you that tried, that prayed consistently, that sought consistently, that returned to the threshold of release again and again and found it only partially available, that person was not failing. That person was working with the tools and access available at that level. What is being offered tonight operates at a different layer than what most of those attempts were reaching. The reason the inherited overlays, the unworthiness frequency, the residue of disappointment have felt immovable is not that they are permanent features of who you are. It is that the frequency required to move them at the level where they actually live has not been consistently available until now. It is available now. The objection that feels most solid because it has the most accumulated evidence behind it, years of non-arrival, patterns that persist despite effort, the sense that others receive what you have asked for with less apparent faith and less apparent effort. The unworthiness argument has receipts, and this is precisely why the violet flame addresses it as a frequency rather than as a belief. You cannot argue with accumulated evidence. You cannot choose to simply feel worthy when the field is running a frequency that contradicts the feeling. But you can consent to something that moves through the field at a frequency the unworthiness argument cannot survive. The argument loses not because it has been disproven, it loses because the frequency that carried it has been transmuted, and without the carrier frequency, the argument has no field to return to. The fire that runs through the scriptural narrative is not a metaphor waiting to be decoded. It is a running record of encounters with a specific operative principle. Moses at the burning bush, Israel guided by the pillar of fire in the wilderness, Elijah calling fire on the sacrifice at Carmel, Isaiah's coal, Ezekiel's chariot of fire, John the Baptist announcing a baptism by fire, Pentecost, Revelation's lampstands burning. These are not independent incidents. They are documentation of a consistent principle working across centuries and testaments, that there is a frequency moving through the scriptural narrative that purifies, guides, empowers, and activates. The violet flame is the 20th century naming of a principle that has been operative since the first burning bush made it impossible to pretend that fire and God were unrelated. The clearest way to understand the difference between the two stances is this. Performance is oriented toward output, something you produce that is sufficient to earn access. Reception is oriented toward input, something you allow in. Most people who have been working spiritually for a long time have developed sophisticated performance capacities. They know how to engage, how to pray with intensity, how to sustain a visualization, how to speak a declaration with conviction. These are genuine skills. But the activation available tonight does not interface with skills, it interfaces with the opening. The irony that most teachers do not say aloud is that a highly developed spiritual skill set can become a way of remaining in a performing stance when what the moment requires is a receiving stance. Put the skills down for this one. Simply be present and allow. What Sophia has been waiting for is not a more complete version of you, not a version that has processed more, healed more, achieved greater clarity, gotten the relationship right, stabilized the finances, stopped repeating the pattern. Not a future version that will someday have earned the transmission. She has been waiting for the version that is here right now, in this room, holding this phone or sitting at this screen, tired and willing, not even confident, just willing. The willingness does not need to be large. The field does not measure it quantitatively. The willingness needs only to be present, a genuine interior yes, even if it is accompanied by significant doubt. Sophia works with the yes. The doubt is part of the arrival. It does not disqualify anything. In the traditions of icon prayer, the practitioner does not approach the icon with effort. They approach it with stillness and openness, allowing the frequency embedded in the image to move without resistance from the viewer's field. The icon functions as a frequency carrier. The viewer's role is to be a sufficiently clear receiver. The prayer is less an act than a quality of presence. What that looks like is a slight softening of the protective contraction that constant navigation of the world creates, a permission granted not by the mind, but by the entire field. A yes that moves through the body, not just the intellect. The receiver stance is not passive in the way sleep is passive. It is active in the way a door is active when it opens. The opening is the action. Everything else follows from that one movement. The flame does not need your assistance. It does not need your visualization to find its target. It does not need your instructions about which layer to address first. It does not need your reassurance that you are serious about this. It does not need you to believe in it completely before it will consent to work. It knows your field better than you know your field. It has been watching longer. What it needs from you is the one thing only you can provide. Access. The door is yours. You are the only one who can open it, not to let the flame in from outside, to stop blocking what is already pressing at the boundary, waiting for the moment you stop insisting that you are not yet ready to receive it. Consent in this context is an interior movement, not a verbal formula. The tradition has used words and decrees as tools for training the interior orientation. Not because the words are operative in themselves, but because spoken declaration can assist the field in aligning with the intention the words represent. But the mechanism underneath the words is the consent, not the words. The consent looks like this: an interior release of the contraction. A willingness to be affected at layers you cannot fully monitor. A yes that does not require knowing exactly what you are saying yes to, only that what you are receiving is from a source you recognize as trustworthy. Sophia's transmission is recognizable to the part of you that has always known this kind of frequency. The consent is that recognition acting. Here is what it can look like in the next few moments. You stop doing other things, not because you are required to, but because the quality of reception improves with the quality of presence. You let the field settle, the surface agitation that comes with constant input and navigation. You let it quiet for a moment. You do not generate a specific feeling. You do not concentrate intensely. You simply allow the possibility that something is moving through your field right now, that is working at layers below what you can directly observe. You do not need to be certain. You do not need to feel it. You need only to refrain from the particular internal closure that says, "This isn't for me," or "I'll need to do more before I deserve this." The now is sufficient. The field as it is right now is sufficient. Here is something the flame tradition is consistent about. Transmutation is not reversible in the way suppression is. Suppression leaves the original frequency intact beneath the suppression, ready to resurface when the suppression system fails. Transmutation changes the frequency of the substrate itself. It does not hide what was there, it changes what was there. When the violet flame moves through the unworthiness frequency operating in your field, it does not move that frequency into a corner where it waits for a weak moment to return. It transmutes the frequency at the level of the substrate. What returns after genuine transmutation is not the original pattern in a new disguise. It is the space where that pattern was, available now for something with a higher frequency to occupy. Transmutation is not suppression. It is replacement of frequency from the inside. In the days that follow this activation, there are specific things worth watching for. They are subtle enough that the mind looking for dramatic confirmation will miss them. Watch for the moment when a circumstance that would ordinarily trigger the disappointment response triggers something quieter instead. Not absence of feeling, but a faster return to ground. Watch for a conversation about the future that moves differently than usual. Less of the internal provisioning against non-arrival, more of a genuine openness to what is being offered. Watch for the moment when someone offers something good to you, and you receive it without immediately qualifying it or finding the reason it might not last. These are the indicators. Not transformation of external circumstances overnight, transformation of how the field processes experience as it arrives. The world does not reorganize itself overnight in response to an interior shift. This is important to say directly because the expectation that external confirmation should arrive immediately after a spiritual activation has been the source of significant disillusionment for sincere people. The financial pressure will still exist tomorrow. The relationship that needs attention will still need attention. The circumstances that have felt like evidence against you will still be present. What will have changed is the frequency at which you encounter them. The baseline broadcast your field is transmitting as you navigate them, and therefore the frequency signature of what you attract as you do. The exterior landscape responds to the interior frequency over time, not overnight. The shift happens now, the evidence accumulates later. Something in your field is going to feel lighter. It may not be dramatically lighter. It may be slightly, almost imperceptibly lighter. The particular quality of a room after someone opens a window you did not realize had been closed. You will not have a clear cognitive before and after. You will not be able to point to the specific moment the weight shifted. But in a week, in 2 weeks, you may find yourself in a situation that has been habitual in its difficulty, and notice that the difficulty is not identical to what it has been before, that the response available to you is slightly more spacious than the one you have been working with, that the gap between triggering event and interior ground is a little wider. These are the signatures of the flame having passed through, small, real, cumulative. Each day the increase continues. Sophia speaks to you now with the directness of someone who has been present through the full carrying, not as an observer watching from a distance, but as a companion awareness that has been alongside you in the specific difficulty of being the kind of person who carries more than they show. She wants you to know this. The weight you have been managing has not been invisible to her. Every night you went through the motions of rest without actually resting, she saw. Every time you smiled through the particular pain of watching what you had asked for arrive in someone else's life and not yours, she was there, not recording it as failure, recognizing it as the particular form of faith that is rarely celebrated, the kind that keeps showing up despite no visible sign that showing up is changing anything. That faith is seen. It was never invisible. The activation that expires at midnight expires in a specific sense. The convergence of conditions that amplifies the violet flame to its current intensity will not recur in this exact configuration. This is not a scarcity manipulation. It is a description of how cyclical time works. The spring tide does not last indefinitely, not because the ocean has become less, but because the configuration of gravitational forces that produced the spring tide has moved. What is available in a spring tide is not available in a neap tide, not because the water is gone, but because the particular force that made it move at that amplitude has shifted. If you are receiving this transmission after midnight, the violet flame remains active. The activation work continues. What will differ is the amplitude, the intensity level that this convergence made available to you tonight. After midnight, the violet flame continues to work at its standard operational frequency, which is not small. Everything described in this transmission about transmutation, about the three targets, about the irreversibility of frequency change, that continues. The midnight threshold is a window of amplified access, not the only available access. The tradition works with the violet flame in ongoing practice precisely because the targets we described, disappointment residue, inherited overlays, unworthiness frequency, are not single-session clearances in most people. They have been building across years, in some cases across generations, and the full transmutation moves through layers over time. What tonight offers is a starting depth that would take longer to reach under normal conditions. The foundation laid tonight will continue to be worked with in everything that comes after. Here is the final thing Sophia asks of you. Not a commitment to a practice, not a declaration of belief, not a promise about what you will do differently going forward. Simply this: in the next few moments, before you move to whatever comes next, let your field be still. Not dramatically still, just less contracted than usual. Let the management strategy rest for the length of a breath. And in that space, simply acknowledge that something is moving through your field tonight that you did not generate yourself and cannot entirely explain. Let it move, not with effort, not with focus, with the particular quality of openness that comes when something in you already trusts what is happening, even before the mind has caught up to the trust. That is enough. That has always been enough. The flame handles the rest. If this transmission moved through you tonight, leave one comment below. The flame moved through me. That phrase is more than acknowledgement. It is the declaration that completes the receiving. Subscribe if you want to be present for the next transmission. And if someone in your life is in a moment when they need what was offered here tonight, send them this video. Not tomorrow. Tonight. The window is still open.